Stop scrolling right now because what you're about to read is not just another story about fame or rumors. It is a moment that changed everything between two people who were once inseparable, and if you stay until the end, you will understand why one sentence from Miles Wei sent shockwaves through everyone who thought they understood their relationship. It did not start in a press conference. It did not start in a public event. It started in silence that felt heavier than words. Shen Yue had not spoken to Miles Wei for days. Not because she hated him, but because silence sometimes becomes the only language left when emotions are too complicated to explain. Across the city, Miles Wei stood alone in a dimly lit room, staring at his phone without touching it, as if the screen itself carried the weight of everything he had failed to say at the right time. His reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, almost like someone watching a version of himself he no longer trusted. He had rehearsed apologies before. In his mind, in late nights, in moments when no one was watching. But none of them ever reached her, because timing had always been the problem. And now timing had become the punishment. Shen Yue, on the other hand, was somewhere quiet, away from cameras, away from noise, away from expectations. But not away from thoughts, because thoughts have no distance limits. And every memory she tried to ignore kept returning with perfect clarity. The way conversations ended too quickly. The way misunderstandings were never fully corrected. The way emotions were always felt but rarely said out loud when it mattered most. She told herself she was done thinking about it. But the heart does not obey instructions the same way logic does. Then it happened. Miles Wei finally spoke. Not to a reporter. Not to a fan page. Not to the world, but directly into a private conversation that somehow still felt like it echoed beyond the room. When he said it, his voice was steady but heavy, like someone carrying something they could no longer pretend was light. I will not let her go unless she accepts my apology. The words were simple, but the meaning was not, because it was not about control, and it was not about possession. It was about unfinished truth. And unfinished truth always demands attention. When the statement surfaced, it did not arrive like normal news. It arrived like impact. Fans replayed it again and again, trying to understand the tone. Was it desperation? Was it love? Was it regret? Or was it something deeper that could not be easily labeled? Shen Yue saw it too. Not immediately, but eventually. She stared at the words without blinking for a long moment. Not because she was shocked, but because she understood exactly what kind of emotion produces a sentence like that. It was not anger. It was not performance. It was someone standing at the edge of emotional exhaustion and still choosing honesty. For a long time, she said nothing, because responding too quickly would have meant reacting to emotion instead of understanding it. And she was tired of reacting. She wanted clarity. Miles Wei waited, not publicly, not loudly, but in the way someone waits when they know they cannot force the outcome anymore. He did not send multiple messages. He did not explain further. He simply waited for something that could not be rushed. Days passed. Then one night, Shen Yue finally responded. Not with anger, not with rejection, but with something quieter. Why now? That was all she wrote at first. Miles Wei read it more than once. Because sometimes the smallest question carries the largest weight. Why now is not just about time. It is about everything that came before it. Everything that was missed. Everything that was delayed. Everything that was almost but never fully done. He responded after a long pause. Because he knew this answer could not be careless. Because careless answers destroy fragile moments. I did not understand what I was losing until it was already gone from where I could reach it. When she read that, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But recognition. Because recognition is the first crack in emotional distance. Shen Yue stepped outside later that night. The air was colder than expected, but it helped her think clearly. She realized something she had avoided for a long time. That not all endings are loud. Some endings happen slowly, through silence. And not all silence means absence. Sometimes silence is just fear of saying the wrong thing too late. Miles Wei was not trying to trap her with words. He was trying to reopen a conversation that had been closed without resolution. And that was different. Days later they met. Not in front of cameras. Not in a staged environment. Just a quiet place where the world did not interrupt. When Shen Yue arrived, there was no dramatic reaction. No sudden tension. Just two people standing in front of a conversation they had both delayed for too long. Miles Wei spoke first. Not rehearsed. Not polished. Just real. I am not asking you to forget anything. I am asking you to let me say it properly this time. Shen Yue listened without interrupting. Because for the first time, she was not listening for defense. She was listening for truth. He continued. I know I cannot rewrite what happened before. But I also know I cannot pretend I did not care. Not then. Not now. Not ever. Silence filled the space after that. But it was no longer uncomfortable. It was processing. It was understanding forming slowly, where confusion used to live. Shen Yue finally spoke. Her voice calm but steady. Apologies do not erase distance. Miles Wei nodded. I know. Then she added something that surprised even herself. But they can explain it. And that changed the atmosphere completely. Because explanation is the beginning of emotional reconstruction. Not repair, but possibility. They did not resolve everything that day. That would have been unrealistic. But something important happened. The tension that had defined them for so long finally loosened. Not completely, but enough to breathe differently. Enough to see each other without the weight of assumption. When they parted that day, there was no promise. No dramatic closure. Just awareness that something had shifted beyond denial. Miles Wei did not hold onto her physically or emotionally in that moment. But he also did not let go of what mattered. Understanding. And Shen Yue did not forgive instantly. But she also did not close the door completely. Because some doors are not meant to be slammed. They are meant to be left slightly open until both sides are ready to decide what they want to do with what remains. And that is where their story paused. Not ended. Not fixed. But changed. And now the real question is not what Miles Wei said. Or what Shen Yue replied. The real question is what happens when two people finally stop running from the conversation they were always meant to have. Do they rebuild what was broken? Or do they finally accept that even unfinished stories can still shape who they become? If this story made you feel something deeper than expected and you want to see what happens next between them, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with someone who understands that sometimes the hardest apologies are not the ones spoken too late, but the ones spoken just in time to change everything that comes after. After that statement, nothing outside their world changed. But everything between them did. Miles Wei's words were still echoing in places he could not control. I won't let her go until she accepts my apology. It was no longer just a sentence. It had become a weight he now had to live with. Because saying something powerful is easy. Living inside its consequences is not. Shen Yue saw the reactions online, but she did not react to them. Not because she was unaffected, but because she understood something deeper now. The world always reacts to words. But only the people inside the silence understand what those words actually cost. She sat by her window that night, staring at the city lights below. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal, because her mind was not in the present anymore. It was somewhere between then and now, between what was said and what was never said, between distance and closeness that no longer had a clear definition. Miles Wei, on the other hand, was not sleeping. He kept replaying the moment he said it. Not because he regretted speaking, but because he was finally forced to face what speaking meant. You cannot demand emotional truth without also facing emotional consequences. And he was beginning to understand that now. The unexpected message. 3 days later, Shen Yue sent a message. It was not long. It was not emotional. It was simple. Why did you say it like that? Miles Wei stared at it for a long time before responding. Because honesty without pressure was the only thing left he could offer. I did not want it to sound perfect. I wanted it to sound real. That answer changed something. Not everything, but something. Because Shen Yue realized he was not trying to control the situation. He was trying to stay in it without pretending. And that difference mattered more than she expected. She replied again. Real does not always mean easy. Miles Wei responded almost immediately this time. I know. Then a pause followed. A long one. Not because there was nothing else to say, but because both of them understood they were approaching something neither had fully prepared for. A conversation without performance. The meeting that was not planned. They met without cameras, without announcements, without expectation. It was just a quiet place that did not belong to either of their pasts. When Shen Yue arrived, she did not rush. When Miles Wei saw her, he did not move forward. They simply stood there for a moment, not as people trapped in a story, but as two people finally outside of it. Miles Wei spoke first. I am not here to repeat what I already said. Shen Yue nodded slightly. Then why are you here? He paused, not because he did not know, but because he wanted to choose his words carefully. Because I realized something after I said it. She waited. He continued. I thought the apology was the important part, but it is not. Understanding is. Shen Yue looked at him for a long moment, not judging, not interrupting, just listening. Then she said something quietly. Understanding does not fix everything. Miles Wei nodded. I know. Another pause followed. This one heavier. More honest. More real. What was never said before. Shen Yue finally spoke again. Do you think things can go back? Miles Wei did not answer quickly, because he knew the wrong answer would destroy the moment, and the right answer would change it forever. So he chose truth. No. I do not think they go back. Shen Yue's expression did not change, but her silence did. He continued, but I think they can go forward differently. That line stayed between them, not as comfort, but as possibility, because possibility is not promise. It is simply awareness that something new can exist where something old ended. The turning point. For the first time, Shen Yue exhaled deeply, not from sadness, but from release. Because holding on to unresolved emotion is heavier than facing it. She finally said, You did not say this earlier. Miles Wei nodded. I did not understand it earlier. That honesty was not perfect, but it was enough. And sometimes enough is more powerful than perfect. The final shift. They did not reconcile in the way people expect in stories. There was no sudden reunion, no dramatic embrace, no declaration of restored connection. Instead, there was clarity, a calm, quiet understanding that what they once were could not be rebuilt. But what they could become did not have to be nothing. Shen Yue looked at him one last time before leaving. Maybe some people are not meant to return to how they were. Miles Wei replied softly. But they are still meant to exist in what they learned from each other. She nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition, because that felt true. The ending that was not an ending. When Shen Yue walked away, there was no emotional collapse. There was no regret chasing her steps. Only peace. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. Miles Wei stayed behind for a moment longer, not because he wanted to hold on to the moment, but because he finally understood it. Some people do not leave your life in anger. They leave it in understanding. And that is what makes it final. Not distance, but acceptance. Final closing narration. And so the statement that once shocked everyone became something different in the end. Not a demand, not a confession, but a turning point. Because sometimes the most powerful apologies are not the ones that bring people back together. They're the ones that finally allow both people to stop pretending they do not feel anything at all. And move forward anyway, even if it is separate, even if it is quiet, even if it is not what they once imagined.